But basically anything from Bach or maybe Gabrielli, to now, we're talking about 400 years worth of music. And so, like when I teach students, and they say, well, that note has a dot on it. What does that mean? And I think, well, how much time do we have?
I guess that's why music history courses keep expanding.
Hey everyone, welcome. On today's episode, Serena and I are talking to Greg Clinton and Mary Perkinson. These two are colleagues in multiple ways at the symphony, at UNO, and quartets. They were a joy to talk to, a treat, if you will. We talk about shifting mindsets, being flexible, auditions, and why the things we hear from our teachers can change our lives. This was definitely filmed backstage, so you're going to hear that at a couple points. Luckily, Greg and Mary powered through. We could talk to these two for hours. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. Thanks for being here. Enjoy. Well, between the natural light and your natural radiance, I think.
There's going to be a glow.
Actually,
I don't see it now, but just wait till then.
I know how to use video effects, so I think I can get just like a nice angelic, which is perfect for this weekend and after music at Celestis and everything. But hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Would you please introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mary Perkinson, and I play violin in the symphony and teach at UNO.
My name is Gregory Clinton. I've been in the orchestra a long time. I got the job in the Omaha Symphony as Associate Principal Cello in 1984.
Okay, so this
is like my
41st year.
First or 42nd season. Maybe it was 83, 84. I don't know. I was 24 and I'm not 24 anymore.
We
Let's
can
just say that.
We'll also change that in Photoshop. You're going to look so fresh.
Thank you. I don't know. I don't look too bad, do I?
40.
But anyway, cellist. I'm a cellist.
You're a great cellist. And you're a great violinist. Okay, so 41, 42 years possibly. Mary, how long have you been playing with us?
This is my 11th year.
Okay. It goes by fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you stop counting? Because I feel like my first couple seasons, I was always like, all right, third year with the symphony, we're doing this, this, and this. And now it's year something, something, something. And, when you say like, oh, it could be 41, 42 years, at what point are you just letting it flow forward?
I don't know. Probably when you get somewhere in the 30s, you just sort of lose track, especially when it's between, in the middle of the decade. 4, 5, 6, I don't know,
So much like turning 34, 35, you're like, I'm going to ignore this particular.
Right. I mean, I play in the Grand Teton Music Festival too, and I started in 1990, so that's not too difficult to figure out the years, but it's 30-something, and it doesn't really make any difference. So,
did it feel like a big deal, though, in your first few seasons? In both organizations? Did it feel like you were marking those milestones?
Well, sure, because, when you first start a job, almost everything that you're playing, not everything, but, a lot of the things that you're playing, they're new pieces to you, so everything is a lot of discovery for the first time. Now that when you've been doing it a long time, you're coming back to things, it could be the 8th time, 10th time you come back to it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's not to say that things aren't, even more challenging now than they were in the beginning, because you were going to ask something about differences in what you play these days as opposed to what you played in the beginning. And now we're playing composers that are basically writing things, based on riffs and stuff like that, and not necessarily like, oh, what the cello does really well is this long spun out melody. No, we're going to have them play like a violinistic type of, riff, and it's challenging compared to some of the other old things. So
it is, and yet I feel like every time I've looked, there's a pocket of music rep, like Schoenberg Chamber Symphony, keeps floating up to what I'm thinking, where it's not new, but it's so intimidating because nobody does it. And even just listening to a recording of it makes you want to like clench up. It just sounds so difficult, but that's not new writing. So are there moments where are you ever thankful that you're not playing that rep, or do you wish you had a crack at that rep and then that would put current rep into context? Do you ever think about that packet that we kind of like miss?
I don't know. I mean, there's something that when I look at, like, for example, a season of the Chicago Symphony, which is an orchestra I aspired to get into at one time when I was younger. Not for the lack of trying. I think I auditioned for Chicago maybe 3 times. I look at what they play on a weekly basis, and there are some weeks I think, thank God I don't have that level of, of repertoire that I have to play. But I must say that a lot of times we are pulled in so many different directions, and we are pulled into, I don't want to say complacency, but we're going to do like a big band concert or, an American Songbook concert like we did at Pace or whatever. And you get into that kind of mode, and all of a sudden, bam, hey, you got to play Musica Celestis now, which is on a totally different level. And I think to get yourself, wound up into that mode, sometimes it's maybe more difficult than if you just stayed there all the time.
And I look at Chicago's season on a regular basis to see what they're doing, and they don't have that style. I mean, yes, the classical repertoire spans so many styles and genres, but they don't have that elasticity where they have to turn on a dime and do a Motown concert or a Star Wars program or something like this. They're sticking in that classical repertoire.
I mean, they do a lot of, and especially that orchestra, which has traditionally done Strauss and Wagner and Bruckner and Mahler, and it comes from a real core of Germanic, late Romantic, Germanic music, which has got a lot of similarities. And not to say that they don't play Mozart, but even Chicago, of course, is playing movies now. They're probably not all that thrilled, but you got to stay afloat somehow, right?
I would argue some of those John Williams scores are harder than some of the Bruckner and the Strauss.
Well, it might have more similarities than
than you think.
Well, I mean, the early John Williams, you're still in the vein of, like, for cello, which is always interesting because it always oscillates between having a subordinate or foundational type role to one that comes to the fore or whatever. Which early John Williams does that a lot. He gives a lot of great melodies to the cello, and so I would say some of the later stuff, which starts to become sound effects. Have you ever played Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
I've done the concert suite, but I've never done the actual film. Mary, have you?
Yeah, some of that's really difficult because it's just like, it's like some of the stuff that we play in Harry Potter or whatever, or where we've got lots of sound effects and that kind of stuff, and not the big melodies that you associate from the earlier, either Star Wars and Harry Potter.
But you're right. Like the level of flexibility it requires to even just shift your mindset from one thing to another, even a family concert. So today we did the Planets, and we had this epic concert the last 2 nights, and then we have the family version today, which is most of the same music, but the whole environment is different, and the kids in the hall make a huge, just the relaxed fit of the hall. It's like, okay, so this is still Kernis, this is still very, very, very difficult, but it's not the pin drop silent that we came to expect on Friday and Saturday. And you two especially, because you both work at UNO, because you both play in string quartets, because you both work for the Chamber Music Society, you're both in this orchestra, like, you're constantly shifting your mindset here and everywhere else. So Mary, I'm going to start with you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you wrap your head around a work week that could have you doing 3 to 8 dozen different things over the span of 7 days?
I think just being really aware of where the audience is coming from and who the audience is. So meeting that energy level, whether that's at the Cancer Center playing quartets, whether it's here playing a youth concert or a Masterworks concert, or playing chamber music with the Omaha Chamber Music Society. It has to do with meeting the energy of your audience. And so in order to do that, we have to take a step back and kind of remove ourselves from our instruments and kind of wrap our heads around what's happening, what's important here. Because of course, yes, playing all the right notes is really important, but it's also like, we're going to play very differently at the Cancer Center than we would in a Masterworks concert. Like our energy is going to be different. We're going to understand and realize that in order to connect with patients and visitors, our energy has to kind of be tamped down a bit and be in a more sensitive place. Whereas here, if we play a Masterworks like last night, it's kind of like very intense and very much, in a way, you're still connecting and it's all about connection, but it's just a different way of connecting, I would say.
So in the way that, Greg, you've been here for 40 something years, and that time has kind of rolled together. Has it taken you less time as you've done these different things? Has it taken you less time to get into that new mindset? Does it take the same amount of time? Do you have a routine? Do you have an approach?
We'll see with people like Greg who have been doing this for decades. I mean, I'm in such awe of like how quickly they're able to change gears and go from one thing to the next, and like seriously, the rock stars in my opinion. And so I've gotten to learn a lot more how to kind of adapt and acclimate and be in the zone for whatever particular engagement we're doing, and recognizing that and understanding what's happening. I've learned a lot from people like Greg, and people have been doing this for longer than me.
Is there something in particular that like Greg does or the rest of your quartet does that you clued into, or is it just being around musicians who are like settled and like set?
Yeah, I think it's more of like a observation and kind of taking in what I see them doing and kind of grabbing hold of that for myself. And that's what we have to do as musicians all the time, is learn from people who are better than us and aspire. And so I think it's just taking these little nuggets where I can. Yeah.
I would say that there's really no substitute for experience. I mean, sometimes you just do things naturally because you know that repertoire, or at least you're familiar with that style. The one thing that's that people probably don't realize, or they don't think about it actually, is that the demands on an orchestra musician today are probably greater than they ever have been. And the reason for that is, if you just think back to maybe your traveling troubadour or Baroque musician, they basically were responsible for, a certain set of music that was composed not particularly long ago. Everything
the Tuesday before.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe just a few years, or maybe a decade or two at the most. But you fast forward to now, and not only do we have to, we don't play Renaissance music typically in the orchestra, right? Because it wasn't written for a symphony orchestra. But basically anything from Bach, or maybe Gabrielli, to now, we're talking about 400 years worth of music. And so, like when I teach students, and they say, well, that note has a dot on it. What does that mean? And I think, Well, how much time do we have?
I guess that's why music history courses keep expanding. Like, instead of 2 years,
Right.
or 3 years now.
And not only can you discuss what the dot means on the note, but then when you also extrapolate that and are connected to your instrument, just the mechanical, what do you have to do to realize it? Because a dot on a quarter note in Brahms is not the same as a dot on a quarter note in Stravinsky's neoclassic period, or well, it probably wasn't even a dot in Bach's music because he didn't bother to write anything down. You know why? Because everybody at that time knew how to do it. They didn't have that much music to be responsible for. They didn't know what Beethoven was, or who Brahms was, or who Aaron J. Kernis was, or anything. That was all yet to come.
That's actually a really great point.
Mm-hmm.
And me, it's actually I did not. So okay, so it. Yes, that's all completely true. You have to be kind of like a master of none in some cases. Like you just know enough to be dangerous. So then how much are you relying on, let's take Dvořák and Elgar, for example. Alistair Neil came in, I think one person on stage had played that Elgar before, one person that we know of had played Elgar's First Symphony,
Right.
and it wasn't here. And so, I mean, I flipped through that music and it was not, I liked it, but it was not intuitive. The way the licks went, like nothing lined up the way I expected it to. It was not following any of the rules that Brahms or Beethoven or even like Strauss dictated. So it was driving me crazy. And so I relied a lot on Alistair to be the expert in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could just put blinders on and do what I was told. And there's a lot of comfort in having someone just tell you what to do. But you guys don't really, and as a conductor, you don't have that privilege. So who do you rely on to be the expert in the room when you're at the Cancer Center, when you're in a quartet, or when you're in that inner circle and you're really relying on those inner voices, when you're putting together an interpretation, who do you rely on?
Wow, I think who you rely on changes, can almost change every few seconds depending upon, I mean, the more you rehearse something, then of course you know who's got the important voice and who the person or the voice is that you're going to latch onto. You're either accompanying them or you're leading them or you're doing something, in conjunction with somebody else. You're not just sitting there in a vacuum. I mean, of course, your number one rule when you play in an ensemble, something other than yourself, is to be in the right place at the right time, and that's where we all start. But soon enough, you learn that, I'm number 4 on the totem pole here, or maybe you have to come to the fore. So yeah, you never really completely rely on the conductor. You don't completely rely on, if you completely rely on somebody else, you're sunk. I mean, there are times you have to take charge. Even sometimes the orchestra has to the conductor has to let the orchestra take charge. It's not just, it's all about, look at me, mm-hmm. and, you're a completely different entity. So and it's always shifting. It doesn't look like that to the audience, I don't think. Does it? I mean, we're all, my clothes don't change color as we're playing or something. We all look the same and whatever, but it really is it's like looking through a kaleidoscope or something, as you turn it. I mean, everything, it's always changing. It's never the same.
Yeah, I think with the Kernis, we had all that Divisi going on. And so looking at the score, trying to see who I was playing with when, I'm like, okay, the only person I can really rely on is Ankush and my stand partner. And if one of them, or if the stand partner gets off, then it's just, you have to be really independent. And so kind of focusing on them rather than the big picture, because if you focus on everyone else, no one's going to be able to help you. They're all coming in different places. And then if we're doing chamber music, like Greg said, I often think it's the person kind of with the most knowledge of the space or the audience, or who has the strongest opinions sometimes, and then just kind of like backing off and let them go with it. So it's a lot about like a good marriage, kind of a lot of compromise. And it's not always the first violin who's going to lead everything, you know?
Yeah, those are the worst chamber music. I don't know if you've ever been one of those chamber music things, you know, like, look at me, I will lead everything, you know, I'm the boss. And it's like,
We've played those chambers.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't think I want to be in this group anymore. You know, because that's not what it's about. And those opportunities are the ones that you look to so that you all have input. Because, I mean, obviously in orchestra, and to get through some of these programs, sometimes in one rehearsal, oftentimes two at minimum, but sometimes one, or even four when you've got a really difficult thing like the Elgar or whatever, somebody's got to take charge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really great if the conductor really knows that score well and can lead everybody. And then once everybody gets comfortable with it, well, then you can let somebody else, you know, you can give the winds more leeway in how they want to play their solos, and then we will bend to what it is they want to do. And if the conductor's in concert with them, allowing them to do it. I mean, there's some conductors that put the wing players in straitjackets, and the wing players don't like those kinds of conductors very much. You know, but once you get there, you know, then it really works. But in chamber music, I mean, everybody's role, once you get familiar with the music, the roles change. I mean, like, for example, the thing that makes a cello so interesting is a lot of times you're either propulsive force, you're thinking that you're going to maybe ask about the difference between like classical period music like Mozart and, you know, Mahler or something like that. And, you know, in Mozart, I mean, more often than not, our job is to, in tandem with the conductor, and you know this as well, playing bass, you know, that your job is not to like, hey, look at me. You know, it's not about look at you. Your job is to like provide this underpinning, but actually this propulsive force in the music.
Right, we're goosing the gas pedal almost at all times.
Right, if you just get complacent, right, exactly. If you just get complacent and just let it drag, the whole thing is just kind of like, it's not going to be very interesting for the audience. They won't know why, but that's probably what's happening, right?
Yes, and we in Mozart's case, we have almost entirely the same parts that you do.
Exactly.
And I hate it.
You do?
I love it and I hate it. I hate it because you hear a cellist play 35. We're about to play Mozart 35 next month. You hear a cellist play, it's just like, oh, well, that's not so bad. And then you this is the land speed, right?
You have the instrumental, you know, thing to think. Well, I mean, not that it's easy. It shows up on every cello audition, you know, known to man.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got greater distances to execute, then that makes it even more difficult.
The real thing I hate is that other people can do it, and so I know it's possible, and it's just like, this is my own failing. It's keeping me back. But okay, so from a conductor's perspective, sometimes I see the orchestra as kind of like a skittish horse that you have to be like, okay, we're all right. Like, we're gonna, and knowing there's institutional knowledge, so pieces that the ensemble's played, and also like our winds will have that. Like, it's okay, this is how this goes, and that calmness kind of radiates out. And then there's sometimes pieces, again, like the Elgar, where everybody's just in the same boat of, okay, we're gonna pray, and then we're gonna start. You have the bulk of the music during the season that I think we're all seeing for the first time, because we do these great community programs, these great like pop-up programs where it might be the first time it's on our stands. So what's the best way to start calming the horse when you know you're about to tackle something in one rehearsal?
I think it goes back to like when you're a student and everything's new to you, how do you find that knowledge of what makes a dot, like what a Stravinsky dot sounds like versus what a Brahms. We all had to start from we don't know, and then we're taking courses, we're reading books, we're informing ourselves, we're listening to historically informed music, and you know, and as we learn, as we're gathering all this knowledge, we're kind of in this, as a student, perpetual place of, oh, I'm always going to try, I need to find an answer. And I feel like that's a lot of just every time you open a score, it's time to find the answers. What's the tempo that's going to work for a certain effect or something? Or so that's kind of how I approach the same, Motown concert as I do Elgar, which is, are there recordings? What do the recordings mean? Are the Elgar recordings I'm listening to historically informed because it's Elgar himself conducting, or is it, a modern kind of interpretation by the London Symphony, who presumably has played this a bunch of times, but the recording was done in the early 2010s or something? There are so many considerations, and then you can look at it and say, why did they make this decision, in terms of articulation, or pacing or tempo and all that stuff. And you at least try to find an answer that you can justify. And it's not, you're not going to the orchestra and answering every question and justifying every decision, but at least you need to be able to know why you came to that decision and know for yourself that you made it for the right reasons.
So you're being a sponge.
You're being a sponge, and you're trying to make the best decision for everyone always. And that's is kind of the, I've written, across all these different recordings, this is a tempo that's going to be successful based on, whatever, all these justifiable reasons. And then you do it for the betterment of, ideally so that it's a successful performance. And hopefully you can build that trust with the musicians. If they're a bit like, I'm not really sure, but hopefully you can show them, and that you've done the work, because that's your job to, make ideally the decision that'll create the most successful performance, because you're not the one making sound. Musicians are. They're the ones who are actually creating the concert for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
So starting from scratch almost every time, and then learning as much as possible, which brings me back to the question I should have asked at the very top. Do you remember your first orchestra concerts?
How about you, Mary?
I was thinking about that, and I really couldn't. I do remember the first time I played with the symphony.
Great.
This symphony, and when I sat down, it was for like a Halloween concert, I think, back in 2014 in October. And I just remember feeling so intimidated by all of the amazing musicians around me. And I specifically remember seeing Thomas, the violist, and his setup was so beautiful. I'm like, wow, he's really good. And then I remember Rico, who was the personnel manager back then, and he was so sweet to me. I don't remember who my stand partner was, but I do remember this overall sense that I got when I sat in this symphony for the first time that, wow, everyone really seems to have this synergy and this connection, and they enjoy being here, and they're enjoying the conductor. Everything seems just so great. And it was really exciting for me because I felt like it was such a positive place, and I still feel like that today. I really love it.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So you were intimidated, but that kind of dissipated once you...
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone in a new situation for the first time feels, it can feel intimidating.
Even when you've been playing for a while. I mean, so can I ask how long
yeah.
have you been playing violin?
42 years. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So even when I was 36, coming here for the first time, it was still a new situation, and it's a little scary.
Greg, how about you?
When I
How long have you been playing cello? And then do you remember your first one?
Well, I started when I was 9, which is typical in, maybe not so typical these days, because parents want, their kids to do everything. So they'll start on the cello when they're 3, That was, my situation is maybe a little different. I grew up in a suburb of Milwaukee, and my dad had been playing in the Milwaukee Symphony just around the time it was going to transform into a full-time orchestra. Milwaukee Symphony is a really great orchestra, but it really didn't morph into the orchestra that we know today until around maybe 68, 69, which is pretty late compared to some. But my dad was playing it, and then he decided, well, was he going to take a chance that was going to turn out to be something, high paying? Because, Milwaukee probably didn't pay very well at that point. He had a teaching degree, so he got hired to do start a string program in suburban Milwaukee, Greendale, and I used to go with him to these meet and greet with parents. They'd actually come at night with their kid, to look at the violin, viola, cello, bass, which one do you want to pick or whatever. And I used to go with him as a kid. I think he started this maybe in 1967. So I had my eye, on like, I think I'm going to play a cello. So anyway, I started when I was in fourth grade, which is when he started everybody.
So your dad was your first orchestra teacher.
Right, which is probably when I heard my first orchestra concert, probably when he was, maybe even before that, when he was still teaching in Milwaukee Public Schools or something like that, that maybe I heard an orchestra concert by one of the school orchestras or something. That's really hazy. I do remember going to like our analogous concerts for youth with the Milwaukee Symphony, because right around that time they hired Kenneth Skirmahorn to be the music director of Milwaukee Symphony, who, he went on to Nashville. But I distinctly remember going to those concerts, being probably way up in the second balcony or something and looking down and seeing all the instruments. So I don't know when that was, 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9, something like that.
Did you ever doubt the cello?
No, actually. But it's funny because I tell people, I went to these dog and pony thing that my dad did, like, here's the violin. These are the sounds a violin can make. My dad was a trumpet player, but he had enough ability to be able to demonstrate the instruments and everything.
I thought you were going to say your dad was a violinist and your dad's a trumpet player. Okay,
He's a trumpet player. Actually, you're asking about my first orchestra concert, but my first musical, like live musical memory is him taking me to a bandstand at the Wisconsin State Fair, where he was playing trumpet, probably in a rodeo band as a freelance gig. And I remember that. I definitely remember that.
How good was your dad at trumpet?
He was very good.
So many questions. Okay, so he could have if he had stayed with the Milwaukee Symphony, he could have been. Was he principal trumpet? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I think he might have been assistant or associate or something. But the guy that ultimately, Dick Metzger, the guy that ultimately became principal. I think my dad, was sitting right next to him, so that whatever. So he was a good player. Yeah. Yeah,
and
so
still wanted to play rodeo gigs at the Milwaukee.
Well, at the time, you took like now. We take just about anything we could get anyway, regardless of whether we're playing Elgar or whatever. We'll still, when we play this Cancer Center gig, we play popsy kinds of things, soothing kinds of things. We're not going to come in there and play Shostakovich String Quartet. That's not going to help anybody over at the Met Center. You know what I'm saying?
So I have a quick story. When Thomas Wilkins was still music director and we were planning out the season, I think it was ultimately the season that got canceled because of COVID. But we were considering one of the Shostakovich chamber symphonies.
Yeah.
And the only Jocelyn week that was open was January or February. And he looked at it and he scratched it off. He's like, we can't play Shostakovich in January or February. People will jump off the roof. So
especially if we've had a bad patch of sub-zero temperatures or something, and then you're going to play this. Yeah. You got to, like Mary was saying, you have to play for your audience and kind of assess the situation. You don't want to dumb down and think, well, we're just going to play. We're not going to challenge anybody at any time, but there is a time and place for lots of things.
Yeah.
You know?
But sorry, you were saying your dad, the trumpet player, the very good trumpet player,
Yeah.
was showing off each string instrument.
Yeah, so I was looking at, and initially, I mean, I was drawn to the cello because I like the sound, but the number one priority was like, I looked violin and viola, and I said, oh, heck no. I mean, you got to hold this thing up all the time. I mean, that's ridiculous. And who the heck wants to haul a bass all over the place? And I said,
I'm a dumb kid, Greg.
cello, you're sitting down, got an end pin holding the cello up, and it's a very natural thing. I mean, it's a great instrument to play as an adult because you don't have to go into some sort of, weird contortion that you don't normally do. I mean, this is like drinking a glass of water, putting up this, so it's possible. And no, but I mean, I really ultimately loved the sound of it. And no, I never regretted. I mean, we don't have the repertoire that you do.
So it's really interesting what motivates people to choose their instruments. So we just heard Greg's motivating factor about why he chose his. And for me, when I was 5, we all got to play violin in the Philadelphia public schools. As like all my siblings got to do that too. And I remember when I opened the case and I was looking at it, and I opened the little pocket where the little rosin lived.
That is a magical place.
Took out the rosin. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all mine. Now, I had an identical twin sister. My parents had 8 kids. I had to share everything. And I was often confused for my twin sister. But when I took the rosin out, it was all mine. I didn't have to share. And then the violin, when I first held it, I put the scroll right here because I thought it was like the neck and the scroll was supposed to go where the neck is because it looked like a neck.
Because you're 5.
Right. And from that moment on, I knew that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I'm like, I'm doing this. And the first concert I remember seeing was the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so I was so lucky to be able to go to those concerts and that my mom took me. And after I saw those concerts, I wanted to be first chair of the Philadelphia Orchestra. Mm-hmm. That was like my dream. And so, I was so excited. But yeah, I never wavered. And so I know for a lot of people, even including musicians, sometimes it's kind of like a struggle figuring out exactly what you want to do and what brings you the most joy and what you're most passionate about. But for me, I was really lucky in that I found that when I was 5.
You had like a wand chooses the wizard moment with that rosin.
Yes, and with it being all my own.
But I do get that because that was how my teacher tricked me into bass. Well, they ran out of cellos. My brother is a violinist, and so I heard him practicing first, and I was like, absolutely not. Sorry, John. And then I wanted to play cello, and they ran out. And so my teacher, who's still teaching, she's amazing at Amherst Public Schools, Mrs. Boysenall High. She just pulled out this like quarter-size bass, and she basically said, "This is just as good. I will give you lessons. You can play any of the cello parts that you want. I'll teach you." And she did. She came in before school. She gave me private lessons. I got to play the cello part if I wanted to, for like rehearsals and stuff. Like she just went above and beyond. And my parents were, of course, they had said no bass when I left for school that day, and I came back with one. And it was just like, but Mrs. Boysenall said that this is just as good. And that's how it, yeah.
What grade were you in?
4th.
It probably was a little bass, though.
Very little.
So it wasn't that, overwhelming, right? I mean, for your parents.
And we already had the minivan. Right, we already had the minivan. And yeah. Actually, the best memory I have of that time period was I was the only bass player in the elementary school, and the middle school is across the street. And so the vice principal would walk me across the street, like across the parking lot rather, to go to the middle school to play in the middle school orchestra rehearsals because they didn't have a bass player either.
Wow.
So Mrs. Boysenall made sure that I could go back and forth. And so it's all her fault. It felt the same. It felt like, oh, this is mine and no one else can have it. and that's really very precious.
Mm-hmm.
What point did you know that you wanted to be a professional cellist then?
I don't know. I was always pretty into it, pretty serious about it, but I didn't really develop that maybe until I was a sophomore in high school, which still I suppose is pretty early, considering there are a lot of kids that decide, I'm going to go to college and go into general studies and I have no idea where I'm going to end up. I mean, they'll just take a bunch of core courses and maybe I'll go into business, maybe I'll go into sociology, who knows, whatever. But no, I think that I pretty much was set on doing, because we had a really strong youth orchestra program in Milwaukee, and so I was pretty, the tentacles just kind of, wrapped around, and then there's like no going back. But you're right about the instrument. You develop this sort of intimate, like, I mean, obviously I'm not the only cellist in the world. You're not the only violinist, flutist, conductor, whatever, bass player. But you it's a very intimate thing, right? And it becomes very strong. Not to say that you have to do it as a vocation. I mean, there's a lot of happy people that can do it as a side gig.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to do classical as a side thing, but certainly can do. I mean, there's a lot of people that have great jobs at the bank or the insurance company or whatever, and they play in a band.
I do think you're right, though. It's like an extension. You start to consider your physical instrument as like an extension of yourself, and if anything, you can have fights with your instrument. You could have like, it's winter and this is dry, and why do you sound like this? And we fixed this last winter, and like this is annoying. Why are we still having this argument? Or you have days where it just everything feels easy and amazing, and the rosin is working. Like, it's amazing how it affects you as a how your instrument is doing mentally and physically affects you as a person.
Mm-hmm. You have to have enough of those days, though, otherwise it'll never become something that you want to do long term. Because I run into people all the time. Oh, I played the cello when I was in 7th grade or whatever. I really wish I had continued it and all that kind of thing. And it's like, okay, maybe you do, but you have to put up with those really, really bad days. Fortunately, there's enough of the really great days that overbalance the bad daes. Otherwise you wouldn't do it. I mean, if it didn't bring you that deep satisfaction or joy or whatever, you wouldn't do it, because certainly nobody is getting rich off of doing this.
Not many people. I think there's a handful. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's Yo-Yo Ma, and there's other fantastic cello soloists in the world, and I don't think that they're making that kind of money. But
But we get to see them and the joy they have. Like, it's still...
It's very important.
It's so important. When you were... So once you decided you were going to do this, age 5, and I'm going to say roughly like 15, 16.
Yeah.
You go through school. Your first auditions for professional orchestras, what were those like, and what expectations did they kind of set for you for what an orchestra job was going to be like?
You have any recollections?
That's a loaded question, Dani.
Sorry.
Wow. Well, the first actual orchestra audition that I remember taking was in college. And it was probably the worst audition experience you can possibly imagine. Even though I said I wanted to be a professional violinist at age 5, when I expressed that to my private teacher at age 16, he said, "You're not good enough and you didn't start young enough." So, and I trusted him, and I think that he was, honestly, I think he was trying to protect me, because he, went to Juilliard, he knew the competition, and so I still auditioned for to be a music major at Boston University, and I got in, but I also got in to be an English major. And so because he said I wasn't good enough, I decided to be an English major. And so because I trusted him, and ultimately I think he was doing it for what he thought were the right reasons. And so the first day of classes, I had to take a math class. And I was like, okay, I came to college to get away from math and science. So like, what's up with this? So right after that class, I went to the dean of the college. I said, I'm sorry, I need to transfer to music. So my whole big plan that I had thought of within that first day was to do music for 2 years, to do a loophole around math and science, and then go back and do an English major. So in my 18-year-old mind, that was my plan. Okay, the day before also, we had to go to the financial aid office and my mom had to co-sign on a loan for me. So this was back in 95. Guess how much Boston University was for 1 year?
This is going to hurt. $12,000.
Mm-hmm. Keep going, Dani.
20?
Keep going.
30.
You got it. So 30 a year. So she co-signed on a loan for 15. And the look that she gave me, I will never forget it. Because remember, she had 8 kids. She was a single mom at this time. And so, yeah, I will never forget it. So anyway, fast forward a day, and I go to the music school. I hadn't played my instrument in 3 months. The dean had to sign my paperwork.
Oh,
I went to the music school. And guess what I had to do that first day?
audition.
Yes.
Oh.
So I ran to the Howard Johnsons because that's where they put me because I was so late with everything. They didn't have any dorms. I was staying in a hotel for the semester, grabbed my violin, and guess what I had to play in 2 hours?
Excerpts or so.
Don Juan. Okay, so my level of playing was Preludium and Allegro. So that's like 5th position on the instrument. That was my audition piece for music school. And so I was like, oh, cats eat good beef. I'm trying to just even like figure out what the notes were. And so then 2 hours later, I go in and I try to play. I sound so bad. You know, we all know when we don't sound good. Everyone knows when they don't sound good. And like, I started to cry during my audition because it sounded so bad. And then someone on the audition committee, they all knew I just transferred. He said, now, why did you decide to transfer? Like, what the heck are you doing here? And so at that point, I just completely lost it. And then the woman who eventually became my teacher said, because she couldn't live without it. And I just like ran out.
Oh.
So, right, that is like crazy horrible. But then this is the good ending. For the first 2 weeks, I did nothing but cry every day. I'm like, what am I doing here? These people are amazing. Like, I can't even, you know. But then after a couple weeks, I just decided, like, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do in the practice rooms. You know, this is what I want. And I worked really, really hard, and I became a squeaky wheel with financial aid. And after that first semester, I ended up getting a full ride for the rest of the time. And really, I think a lot of it is because that my teacher believed in me and believed that I could do it. And so, like, I feel like in our lives, we all, like, we need that.
That phrase, because she couldn't live without it. Do you think, I used to teach with you guys at UNO, and I loved being there. But the attitude that you all have with your students is, if you want this, then we'll do it together. Do you think that's because you had that teacher at Boston who's like, she couldn't live without it, so we're going to figure this out?
Yeah, I mean, I was at a place where I didn't believe in myself, and she believed in me. And to have that kind of have someone believe in you like that, I had never really had that as a musician, like another musician. And so I feel like that definitely influenced the way that, you know, I interact with my students. And Yeah, for sure.
Okay, one more question. When you saw Don Juan on the season, what does that do to you as a person?
So honestly, for my doctorate dissertation, this is when I still thought, I wasn't going to go into higher ed. I was just going to really try to win a full-time orchestra gig. My doctoral final project was practical exercises for 5 standard orchestral excerpts. And one of those was Don Juan. And so literally it was so you could start learning these excerpts little by little at an intermediate level, like kind of breaking it down. But after I finished that, I was like, I don't think I want to play full-time in an orchestra anymore, simply because the amount of work and time needed to prepare and be competitive was just, it became all-encompassing. And so I decided to kind of, in a way, take an easier route and look for jobs in academia.
Easier.
Yeah.
Help the next generation do that. Take on the challenge of a potential full-time job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Damn, Mary.
Yeah. So I think that
What a story.
I think that the guide, I think, is really kind of full circle. And then when we played Don Juan, it was so cool because I'm like, yeah, I'm nailing this. I got this.
How about you? What did you have any moments like that, any auditions like that just kind of like reshook your world? Or do you feel like you kind of gradually got into that level of pressure?
I don't know that there was any one audition, but even coming from a background of having a strong youth orchestra program and then going to Indiana, which you went to, so you know the environment there, which is just sort of like an incubator for everything music. I mean, it's pretty impossible not to learn as much outside the studio as inside, because there are 53 recitals a day in every little nook and cranny, and across 5 buildings, and if you take advantage of that, you are going to absorb a lot. But even having gone there, where there's 5 orchestras and 75 cellists, and you pretty much find that you're maybe not down, at the bottom, but you certainly are a long way from the top, at least for me. I'm just somewhere in the middle. It's fairly humbling when you start going to all these orchestra auditions, especially if you, in the, I don't want to say old days, it makes me sound like I'm completely decrepit, but a lot of these orchestra auditions were not run particularly well. I mean, shout out to Detroit Symphony when they used to play in Ford Auditorium on the river there. It was like a cattle call. I mean, everybody showed up at the same time, and you were all sitting on chairs strewn down this long hallway, and one person would launch into Dvořák concerto, and the next thing you know, there's a dozen people playing Dvořák concerto in unison. That's not a good way to get your head, wrapped around what you're about to do.
That sounds like purgatory.
Yeah, sounds like cellos.
Pretty horrible. But the point is that you go to these things and you hear other people playing the excerpts and you go, oh, okay. Now there's times, there are times that help you reinforce what you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. I remember a cellist that went on into Orchestra Hall stage just prior to me in Chicago, and you're standing in the wings, and so you're able to hear that person play, and they're doing, the Mendelssohn, doing the Mendelssohn, but at the end it's supposed to be that's a slow version, right? It's 6 notes in the measure, right? But if you play it right, in my mind, it's da 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 dee 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 da da da, and they're going da 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 da, like a Gatling gun. And I'm thinking, if that person advances, I don't want to be in this orchestra, because that to me was like totally wrong. But for the few times that I heard somebody play something how I didn't want to play it, more often than not, I would hear somebody play something in a more enlightening way, even to the point where I started second guessing my approach to the excerpt 10 minutes before I was going to walk out there and
Yes.
play for a committee,
Yeah.
which is not the way to do it either. But so auditions can be really maybe helpful, more often than not traumatic, because you have to go out there and sell it. You have to go out there and sell it like, what I am doing is just the way it should be. Because how else would you know, unless you're studying with somebody in that orchestra that says, here in Chicago, this is how we play Tannhäuser, and this is how you should, play, and this is how you should play for the committee. Otherwise, you're listening to a recording of Schulte or something, and going, okay, I think I'll play it like that. Yeah, except Schulte isn't the music director anymore. So it's like, well, is that the way I should play it? And so music is just a funny business. You have to come up with your decisions and all that kind of stuff, and then you just have to go and you have to sell it. And if somebody is in line with that, and they say, congratulations, you got the job. I mean, even getting an orchestra like Omaha, middle tier orchestra like Omaha is not an easy kind of thing.
No,
to do.
Was there your first weeks with the orchestra? Do you remember feeling surprised at all by anything, or was it more of a continuation of your orchestral experience from before?
I think it probably was a continuation because, Omaha, I mean, after talking about Chicago, it's not like you have all of these high-powered people who do this for a job almost, exclusively. They're all full-time. In Omaha, you still have people at different levels. And so, again, I felt like I was, maybe wasn't the best player in the orchestra, but I certainly wasn't the person that couldn't devote the time because they were a lawyer, and they just did this on the side. So I felt pretty comfortable, not completely overwhelmed. So yeah, it was a good. It's probably going to be my last job, and it wasn't my first job. I played in the Milwaukee Ballet Orchestra before I came here, but it's maybe changed somewhat. We're getting better and better players in the orchestra. It's a comfortable situation. I just find it really challenging when we have to play so many different things. I mean, that's it's like when they say it's the best of days, the worst of days, or the best of times, the worst of times. It's sort of the same thing in this orchestra. It's kind of like, well, it's good to like this next week that we only have educational stuff. I know you're more busy because you're doing all the educational
Yes.
stuff. But for us, it's not like what about this week are you going to enjoy? I'm not playing the Kevin Putz Concerto for the Orchestra.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I mean, but being challenged and
Right. What was one of the
increasing-
highlights of this week was
getting, playing some things and being, I didn't nail every lick in that piece, but practicing and getting better. And even when you've been at it for a long time, that's I don't know, it's satisfying.
That must be the common denominator, no matter what role you're in, is that you inevitably are hopefully still pursuing that steady improvement. That Pablo Casal's I'm 90 something and I think I'm improving.
I think I'm missing some improvement. Well, if you lose that, then it's time to maybe not do it anymore. You hate to see people that are miserable because they're hanging on, thinking, well, this is the only way that I can survive, and pay the rent and buy the groceries and all that kind of stuff. But they've lost the love for it.
Do you find teaching helps keep you in that mindset, just seeing growth all the time in your students and also make you question things about your own playing and improving?
I would definitely say yes. I've been here, this is my 11th year, so I have seen some kids that I met when they were 7 who are now getting ready to go to college. Not necessarily my students personally, but to see their growth over the years and working with them in different capacities, either with the symphony side by side or Omaha Youth Area orchestras or events at UNO. And honestly, some of the kids I've interacted with, I would just be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen to you. Are you going to be okay? Because you're just like all over the place and kind of like in all good ways, but like if you want to be a musician, you kind of have to like, and then 5 years later, I see them and they're just a completely different person. So to be able to be energized by that youth and that kind of curiosity and that kind of constant learning and growing is like very, for me, it's one of my favorite parts about being a teacher. Whether they're my student personally or someone else's student, and seeing that growth, I just love it. And I feel the same way in the orchestra, like being inspired by the kind of wisdom and the experience of people who are older than me, but also being inspired by the youngness and the energy of those who are younger than me. So I love that.
It is really, you don't realize that you've hit, when you come into the orchestra and you're 20 something and the time goes by real fast, that first moment where you realize you are no longer the 20 something, you are no longer the baby in the orchestra. There are more babies that are babier than you are. And it almost overnight, just like, oh, okay. All right. Look how good you are, and look how much you add, and look at the energy you're bringing, and look at all these fresh ideas. And it's like scary for like 15 seconds. And then you get over it and realize that this is a great thing to have these people join in. And it does kind of pop everything up to another level again.
Yeah, I think most people really want to play in the very best ensemble that they can play in, even though they might not be the best person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always thought, you know, if I played in Cleveland or Chicago, I wouldn't care that I sit way in the back, you know, because it's the very, very best orchestra. Now, I'm not sure that really is the case, because I do enjoy being up in the fronts, you know, in the first stand in the circle, because the energy level there is probably at its most intense. That's where you're getting most of the information. You're getting it firsthand. I mean, I know we still have to communicate with the horns and the trombones, and there's, you know, big chasm of space there, and that can be difficult. But just in general, I mean, I know when I play in the Tetons, you know, we rotate in a section there, and if I'm back where the bass is a great bass section, but you're really pretty far away from the stick and what the principal is doing, it's way more difficult. People should know this. I mean, everybody in the orchestra knows this. And it's more difficult to play in the back of the section than it is on the first stand.
It's almost like sports tournament seating, right? Like the higher up you are, the better chance you have of doing well as you progress through.
Right.
And in some ways, it's like it's not skill level that determines where you sit for the most part. It's just, in string sections, it evens out after the first two or three chairs because of auditions even. And even then, skill is not necessarily. But it is a totally different mindset to sit in the back as it is to sit in the middle, as to sit in the front. I imagine the energy must be fantastic. Just like the power that comes in to the podium. It must be comparable to what you experience on the podium.
That is like the most... Like, I distinctly remember the first time, and that sound coming at you. There's nothing. I mean, as a flute player, I never sit in that inner circle. It's always kind of the sound from the back, and you are always so just in playing with the kind of, I don't know, attunement to the rest of the wind section. And yes, you are again communicating across, but it's less, you know. You don't have, I'm sitting at the back of 30 flutes. You're only sitting next to the one that you have to, you know, pay attention to. So, it's definitely a whole different sound from that part of the stage. Yeah.
Depending what hall you're sitting in, I mean, I've heard that it's hard to hear forward in this hall. So some of our solo wind players, you know, are sitting back there, don't necessarily get as immediate of a, you know, information as they would like. And sometimes they're, I don't know, maybe second guessing or whatever, just putting it where they think. Now, if they've got a solo line that we're supposed to be accompanying, that's fine. But if they're just supposed to be meshing with something else that's going on, that it does become a challenge. But yeah, for me, I mean, I know you move around because you're back in the seconds, and that's got to be disconcerting. I mean, I've had the good fortune of having really great stand partners here. And I've been stand partners with Paul for, seems like forever. I don't know, 20
Yeah, I think the
years
stand
now.
partner it can really
Well, that can make a big difference.
make a huge difference. And I've been really lucky with awesome stand partners, and a lot of times they change because my seat rotates a lot. But definitely sitting farther in the back, either first or seconds, you definitely feel like you're playing defense in a way. Like you're just catching things that are flying at you, but they're always a half second later than everyone else is catching them. So, and then when you're sitting closer to the front, like for this concert, I was sitting in the second circle. You have no choice but to go along with the energy that is right there with you. So it's a very different experience and much harder to play farther in the back.
Yeah, you just hope that the colleagues that are sitting right behind the first stand are passing the information behind them like that. Because if there's indecision there, or they haven't practiced or whatever, thankfully in the cello section, those guys are rock solid. Tim and Zach, great, So I'm assuming that the people on third, fourth stand are getting the information,
Right. In a way that everyone can play as a section.
Right.
We could do this for hours. I can just tell, but I need to let you both go. So I just have one more question for you.
Okay.
You have 30 minutes, no consequences. You can play anybody's instrument on stage. Now, I know neither of you have regretted your instrumental choices or doubted your instrumental choices, but if you could try another instrument, what would you try?
Well, I've tried some. Strangely enough, I never was really drawn to the trumpet. I mean, I always had this sort of vague idea that I would love to play like lead trumpet in a really hot big band or something. That would be kind of fine, but not to the point where I thought, I'm going to get a trumpet. I'm going to I did try it a little bit in high school, and I could barely make decent sound on it. But I think because of the real connection with the horn, and I really like the sound of the horn, that it might be fun to fool around with the horn, but that'd be even more treacherous than trying to play the trumpet. My God, if I can't play a note on the trumpet, I'll give you a smaller mouthpiece to try. See how that works.
French horn has a disparate number of solos given how hard it is to play well. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a trap. It's always a trap.
But I mean, played well like it is by Brett, it's just a really great instrument. We have so many things connected. So yeah, that would be my thing. What about you?
Okay. So I thought you meant what type of violin would I want to try? But actually it wasn't hard to come up with the instrument, because when I was doing my K-12 certification, I had to learn how to play a lot of them. And to a certain level, which wasn't very high at all. But my favorite was tuba. I loved the tuba. I was the very best one in a class of 13. And I practiced that tuba harder than I ever practiced any of the other instruments. I loved it. And the thing that the two tubas had together in the Planets, was it the Planets?
Yes.
Where they had that?
Yes.
Oh, it was so gorgeous. I just loved the sound. And it was so cool because I could actually play it. None of the other brass instruments I could play because it's just so, but...
Mary,
I love it.
Thank God that wasn't a game show. We all would have lost. Big time.
If we had more time, I'd love to add the element of guess what they're going to say before they say it. That's amazing. You both are amazing. Thank you so much. It's been a delight. We'll have to do this again.
Oh, thank you
Thanks
both
for the
so much.
questions,
It's awesome.
Thanks. Yay. Oh, that was so great. Thank you guys.